Hello, everyone. Now, I know it's Wednesday, and Wednesday has its own cause for concern because, Wednesday is the worst day of the week by definition. But we do have cause to celebrate because we are finally at the point where we finished NetSuite. This is our last NetSuite assignment. And if you like NetSuite, I'm sorry, this is the last time we're going to be doing it for the semester. If you did not like NetSuite, then you can get up and dance a little bit or send emojis to your friends, whatever your form of celebration is. But we're going to wrap up. As we talk about through this, we go through this, keep in mind, so you should be taking diligent notes here and making sure that you understand the talking points as we work through this. The goal here is not necessarily to make sure you understand how to perform a particular step, but you understand the purpose of that step. And we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about like what it is, who's going to be doing the different steps and what the responsibilities are and what the goals of each step are. Now, if you recall, we are in the revenue process, okay? And last week, we created an order. So customer sent an order. Our customer, I believe it was, what was the name of that customer? Zenith Systems. Yeah, Zenith Systems sent in an order for AIS textbooks. And we created that order, and then we got through the approval step. So now we actually just need to do the remaining steps. And normally these would take place sequentially within a shorter time frame. Obviously, we didn't really have the time since we're only working on NetSuite every week or so. But we're going to complete the order process. And if we recall from the revenue process, once we issue that sales order, the next step is to ship out the goods to the customer. Then the customer receives the goods and they say, we've received the goods, they're now our ownership. We have the obligation to pay you. So we're going to send them an invoice, say, here's how much you owe us. And then presumably our customer will pay us. Now, again, that's a simplifying assumption. We've already talked about the nature of accounts receivable and that in a business to business environment, sometimes people owe you money, don't pay you money. It occasionally happens. But for our purposes here, we're going to assume that we're going to receive payment. So once we receive that payment, that's our final step in the process. Now, it's important to note that we do have a couple of deliverables today. So as we stop and I tell you to do something, say to set this print up out, please remember that we do have two deliverables that we're going to be doing. We're going to create an invoice. We're also going to create a customer payment form. Both of these are required for the assignment. I would also like to remind something that I've said multiple times. Please pay attention. I've said multiple times, please submit PDF forms for your deliverables. I did have a few people who submitted non-PDF documents. I was nice, even though I said if you submit a non-PDF form, you will get a 0 on the assignment. I just sent a general reminder saying, please follow my instructions and submit PDF forms. So I'm not going to fall back on that next time. If you submit to the NetSuite file, then I'm going to say, yeah, you didn't follow my instructions. So please make sure you submit to the correct file. And so that's just as a brief reminder. We talked about that multiple times, and yet we still had a couple of issues with that. So please keep that in mind. All right, so let's get started. We have our sales order. Our sales order has been approved. So let's just go ahead. Let's move to our sales order. All right, and we could go through the motions, but I think the easiest way is just go to our recent records, which remember we set up at the beginning of this whole process, and I said this was going to be really important to have. So we're going to click on sales order SO 169, which if you did this multiple times, it may be a different sales order, but most everybody should have this as sales order 169. We're going to navigate there. And we're just going to be walking through the links through this process because that's the easiest approach to this. Now, it's important to note there are ways that we can actually go through this process. We can actually go through these fields. I will point them out. If we wanted to go through and find the sales order list, we could go transactions, order management, fulfill orders. Because again, that's the step we're at. We're not actually creating the orders, we're fulfilling the orders. We're in the process that we're needing to send to the customers. But instead of going through this link right here and clicking on here, let's just go with the order that we know we have, and we're going to click fulfill. Does anybody struggle with that word fulfill whenever they put that in an essay or they put that in an email? It's got an L right in the middle there. It doesn't seem like it should be fulfill, but there you have it. Yeah, I still messed that up, and I've been doing it for going on 40 years now. I guess maybe I used the word fulfill when I was a child. Who knows? Am I vamping? Yes, I'm waiting on the computer to do its thing. Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and check out and make sure that we have these items here. The date should auto-populate, and you should notice the status is picked, okay? Now, I don't want you to change the status, but I would like you to do the drop-down. You will notice that we have 3 separate statuses, picked, packed, and shipped. Let's talk about those really quick, because these are all steps that occur in the receipt or the shipping process. So picking, as it sounds, is just when you go to the shelves and you say, all right, this inventory item is in order, I'm going to put this in a box so that it can be shipped. So that's the picking part. The next pack is where we take the items, we take them from whatever box we put them in, we put them into the box we're shipping in them. They're packed for shipment, and then shipping is obviously, as I said, we send them out to the customer. We're going to go through all three steps, and we're going to do them sequentially because naturally this should be sequential. So let's go ahead and check and make sure that we've got everything set up here. Should have date as today's date. We should have everything set up. Our customer should be consistent. Should be created from our sales order 169 or whatever sales order you used. Probably the most important one is we want to look and make sure, is this the item that we want to pick? And the answer is yes. 5 copies of our I Love AIS textbook. By the way, this box here next to the bill should be checked. If you do not have that checked, it will not be picked. It will not be sent out. So make sure that that's corrected. Let's check a couple of other items that we set up for last week. So once you've checked your items and made sure that the bill box is checked and that we are shipping out 5 items, go ahead and click on shipping. And remember, we had that weird scenario where we said that we were going to say keep shipping carriers more and the shipping method is UPS. Again, I realize that doesn't make sense, but we won't actually be able to ship if we try to actually change the shipping carrier. So we're going to go with the NetSuite defaults. So more UPS and shipping costs of $10. So we're in good shape right there. Let's go ahead and let's click on save. Now, please note, there's a few options down here. If you do the drop-down menu, I would like you to just click on save. We are eventually going to build this. However, we do need to still go through the packing and the shipping process. So don't go to try to save and build, otherwise it will skip those steps. So click on save. And if we've done everything properly, when we go back to item fulfillment, it's going to say everything has been picked. So picking basically means it has been taken off the shelves and it is ready to be put into a box to be shipped out. So our next step is going to be packing these items. Now, the process for this is very, very simple. We're going to go through the picking, we're going to go through the packing, we're going to go through the shipping. In reality, the way this will work, if we're talking about this in a warehouse, the picking step would involve actually going to the physical location of those products and making sure you take them off the shelves and record those. The packing would involve putting them into a box, presumably with some sort of packing container material so that they don't rub against each other and break. And then the shipping would be making sure that they get picked up by the carrier. For us, it's just going to be clicking buttons. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Okay, so does everybody have item fulfillment? IF 131, 10 Zenith systems picked right up here. Should be pretty close to this. I don't think there should be any deviations here, but if they've got it picked, then we're going to be able to note this. Now, let's go ahead and let's just check and make sure that all of our information is correct. Now, again, this is something we would do as part of the process. For us, it's going to be very simple. We're going to click one time when we click mark packed, but we want to make sure we identify the references and make sure everything's correct. Our dates are correct, sales orders reference is correct. The product that we're shipping out has been noted, and we have 30 on hand, but we're shipping 5 of these as part of our quantity for shipment. Again, I don't think that anybody should experience any issues here. If you do experience an issue, raise your hand so we can address it. But yeah.
It could be an issue. For some reason, showing my on hand is blank.
Okay. It may be picking up a different item. I wouldn't worry so much about that right there, but if it's still picking up an item and allowing you to ship it, then I'm not terribly worried about it. But we'll see what happens. If something comes up and says you can't ship this out because you don't have any items on hand, then we've got a problem. But we'll go ahead and mark this as packed. So let's go ahead and mark this as packed up. So we're going to go ahead and putting this in the box now. And as we're waiting for this, the next step is going to say that we're going to be marking this as shipped. Okay, so this is a step where we're going to be saying this is get shipped out to the customers. This looks almost identical to the first one, so all we have to do is check and make sure our information is consistent. Presumably it is. So if that's the case, go ahead and click on mark shipped. Now, just as a reminder, this is going back to what we talked about back in chapter 5 when we talked about the revenue process. This is the point right now where we get to actually recognize the revenue in the revenue our system. Remember, we talked about revenue recognition, and what was the step of that? That's when we ship it out to the customers. And it's important to note that we actually specified a freight on board shipping point for our particular item. So once they leave our warehouse, that is now in the customer's hands. It's now the customer's inventory, so we can recognize our revenue as our sales revenue as being acknowledged. Now, again, that's only one part of our transaction process because we do actually have to send out an invoice and we do have to recognize the subsequent recovery of cash when the customer sends it to us. So we're going to get to that point as well. All right. So yes. He's having issues.
Yeah.
Having issues.
I was able to pack it, but I'm not able to ship it.
Hold on just a moment. All right, so we have an item that's been shipped out to the customers. Now, the customer owes us money, we need to send them a bill. So we're gonna send the invoice. So let's go ahead and talk really quickly. So we're gonna click on bill. There's also a way we can actually go through this. Let's just go ahead and look at the link real quick. So it's gonna be transactions, sales, invoice, sales orders. Now, again, we're doing this through direct links, which is much more convenient. Could we look this up if we needed to afterwards? Yes, we can actually identify it. Probably easiest way is if you get lost and you are trying to find the original document, don't even bother with this link that I'm showing you right here. I'm just kind of showing you the tree to show how we would get there. But if we get to the point where we don't know where we need to be, then we can go back to the home page and we can go to item fulfillment and come back here to the billing point. So let's go ahead and click on bill. All right. So the very first thing I want you to do, all right, we're going to check some information here in just a second, but I want you to look down over here. It says form of invoice. Anybody guess what our step here is going to be? I know it's been a week, but trying to remember what we did at the very beginning of last week. Yeah, primary invoice form is what we're going to change it over to. So that should default because that's our preferred form, but for some reason it will not actually do that. So that's something we have to check and make sure that we set up. So now that we've got that set up as our primary form, okay, let's check our other information. Invoice number is going to be sequentially generated for us, which is good. The date is actually entered. This customer number, the PO number is entered. This is the customer PO number, by the way. The customer PO number is set up. Our location is listed. We don't really have anything else that we need to worry about. None of this other information is relevant. Let's go ahead and check down here, make sure that we have all of our items are listed. So now the very first thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about matching process. So we are in the invoice step process. We're going to send an invoice out to our customer. If we are going to do that, we want to make sure that all of our information is consistent with the documentation that we've sent out up until this point. All right. Now, depending on what level of documentation you have, this can either be a three-way or a four-way match. All right. For the three-way document match, we're going to be talking about how we would match this information to the customer purchase order. Do you remember last week I was talking about this fictitious document I had in hand that I was looking at that was used to create our sales invoice? And then I would also compare that to the sales invoice. Okay, so that would be our three-way matches: purchase order, sales invoice to the purchase order, sales order to our eventual invoice. You can also include another document in there for additional four-way match if you wanted to include the shipping documentation. So we could actually include the shipping report and include that in there for a four-way match. But for right now, I just want to kind of focus on the three-way match, making sure that we have matching information to our purchase order and sales order. All right, so we're looking here. We look and say, all right, sales order was originally a request for 5 items. That matches what our purchase order says. So we're consistent with here. So we can go ahead and we can keep that in there. We don't need to include add because we don't need to add any items. All we need to do is check and make sure that information is correct. Let's just go ahead and let's just check and see what our shipping details are. The shipping details are consistent, so that looks good. The shipping details are making sure they're correct. So if that's the case, if your items are consistent with what your purchase order and sales order items are, and your shipping end terms are correct, go ahead and click on save. This is going to create our invoice, which is one of our deliverables for today, our invoice form. All right. So now we have an invoice. We've sent it out to the customer. The customer is going to pay us money, and they're going to do it very, very quickly, like in a few minutes. Okay. But before we do that, let's go ahead and set up our next deliverable. So our first deliverable is going to be our invoice. So let's go ahead and go to the printer icon and click on print. By the way, I can't tell you how relieving it is to actually click these icons and have a blank page on the background. A few years ago, if you look back at some of the lectures, it was just gaudy because there was an American flag on the background. And remember, we removed that American flag early in the semester. Yeah, it was just pretty. Don't get me wrong. I'm proud to be in America as well, but it just doesn't go well as a background on the invoice. It was kind of silly. All right, check and make sure that we've got our bill to Zenith Systems to good old Joe Smith, or I guess Smith Joe. And then our invoice number is consistent, our terms are consistent, and we have our total here. Total should be $159.95 because it's $149.95 plus the $10 shipping cost. All right. Before we move on, remember that we need to print this out as a PDF file, and then we need to save that PDF file, and that is what we're uploading to Brightspace. I have cautioned you, please do not upload the NL file. If you do that, you will not receive credits, at least not this time. All right, so PDF file needs to be saved, and that's uploaded to Brightspace. This is our first document. I'm just going to leave that open right there. All right, our final step is going to be receiving payment from the customer, okay? And we do need to record this step because we want to make sure that we get rid of the receivable and we record the cash payment. So we can go through this again. You'll notice there's a big bright blue button that says accept payment here. And this is the preferred path that we're going to be using, and that's what we're going to be clicking. We could go through this: transactions, customers, accept customer payment. Would actually have a list of that. Again, what I would highly encourage is, if you need to do this, go through accept payment. If you get lost and you can't find this, go back to your home screen and go back to the original invoice. It should be invoice 230. We're going to click on accept payment for this particular invoice. Part of the reason that it's important to do it through this step is that if you go through the accept customer payment step, if you go through the transactions, customers, accept customer payment, you will find this invoice and you will be able to accept payment, but you'll have to enter all the information again. It does not auto-populate if you go through the path that I just showed you. So going through accept payment through the invoice link, it will actually link all that information directly. All right, let's go ahead and verify some information, okay? So I want to verify customer, all right? Verify date. Want to verify location details. So subsidiary location US West. Also, I'd like you to recognize the following information. So the account is going to be 1010, which is cash. So remember, this is different than the payment account that we were making from. The payment account was 1020. That's what we make the transaction payments from. This is a flow in account where the transactions flow to. Also want to make sure that our accounts receivable account is going to be 1110, accounts receivable to customers. Want to make sure our primary customer payment form is listed here. It should be because it defaults out to here. We also want to make sure that we scroll down. Down here, we have one item that should be paid. It should have the apply box checked here. So we need to make sure of that and check the details of that. Invoice 230. The original amount is $159.95. They're making payment of $158.45. Why is the amount different? Yeah, paid within 10 days. So we have a cash discount, 1% within 10 days, net 30. So 1% discount's being taken right here, $1.50. So we do the math, it makes perfect sense. Okay. So after we check to make sure all that information is correct, and again, it's important to note here, this is also an opportunity for a matching step. We would want to make sure this matching information is consistent with all the previous documentation, which, just as a reminder, we've got a lot of documentation that flows through here. The purchase order, the sales order, the shipping document, the invoice, all of this could actually be sent to the payment to make sure the payment is consistent right here. But assuming that a customer payment is approved, we're going to click on save. There we have a payment. And as I said, there are 2 deliverables today, so you probably guessed that we need to print out a second deliverable. So once you get to the payment form, payment 117, we're going to go to the printer icon and click on print again. It's going to open up a new window for us. It's going to show our payment form. And this is just a payment receipt record. So again, just as before, we're going to go to the printer icon, Microsoft Print to PDF, and save that file. And then we're going to go upload both of our PDF files for our deliverable for this assignment. I'm going to wait for just a second to let you guys get caught up on that. I know that everybody wants to get those printed out and uploaded. Say hurrah that we've completed NetSuite.
Can you go back to your other picture up there?
Right here.
Okay. I just thought I ended up on the wrong screen for a second.
So congratulations. It doesn't seem like much. It seems like you were just following through a few steps of the process, but we have talked about successfully navigating through NetSuite to the purchasing and revenue process. It's not particularly difficult to follow. I know that seemed like a lot of easy steps. There's a lot more manipulation that's possible in there once you get under the details there. But for the most part, you do have some experience and exposure to that now. Probably more importantly, though, is we actually see how an information technology system, how an enterprise resource planning system aligns with some of the concepts that we've talked about in our previous discussions. This is kind of a good point of analogy for us to be able to understand when we talk about things in chapters 4, 5, 6, and all these concepts, how they literally relate to entry within an accounting information system and the backbone for that. All right, let's wrap up. Let's go ahead and do our homework real quick. All right, so based on the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, this is a really weird wording, but based on the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which of the following sections, which is about internal controls? So this is actually in the slides. What section of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act talks about internal control specifically? Section 404. If any of you actually go into auditing as your career, you'll hear a lot of SOX 404 discussions. SOX 404 is a big foundation in auditing. Question number 3. Controls are designed to prevent, detect, or correct errors in transactions as they are processed through a specific subsystem are referred to as what? Okay, so the important thing to note here is that we're talking about controls as they are processed through a subsystem, or as we talk about in class, is going to be within the system of the controls. So that's actually going to be when we talk about anything that a system is responsible for, those are application controls, okay? Application controls. Question number 4, which of the following is not a component in the Code 2013 Internal Control Framework? So I told you guys on Monday that this is something really, really important to note, that you need to know these 5 components because I absolutely will ask you a question on them. So let's just go ahead and refresh ourselves. What starts at the top of the COSO framework? What is that thing called? The tone at the top, we call that the control something. Control environment, the control environment. That's the tone at the top. It sets the tone for the rest of the organization. Then we basically say, what are the risks that those organizations are exposed to? That's called entities risk assessment. Then we have the controls themselves. Those are the control activities. Then we've got details about the controls because people within the organization and outside of the organization need to know how the controls relate to them. That's information and communication. And finally, updating as risks change. That's called monitoring, okay? Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. Know it, learn it, love it, okay? Which of those is not listed up there? Effective operations. That was not one of our 5 items that we listed right here. So not a component of the control framework. I won't specifically give you questions like this. Again, knowing the names of the components is not sufficient. You do need to know what they do. Question number 6, a field check is a what? So what is a field check, okay? What is a field check? Do we have field checks in other programs? Like we talk about it generally. It can generally exist in Excel. It's not specifically exist in Excel. There's a parameter for Excel where we assume that something is going to be a numeric input. And if you have a alpha input, it will not recognize that as a numeric field, or it won't actually include it in the computation. But in other programs like Access or like NetSuite is a good example. If you tried to enter an alpha input in a numeric field, it will say, no, it's not a valid input for this particular field. So that would be an example of a field check. What is that trying to do? What is that trying to do? It's trying to, is it trying to prevent, detect, or correct? So I have a field that only enters numeric information. I don't want information that's not numeric in it. It actually prohibits non-numeric information. What's another word for prohibit? Prevent. It's a preventative control. Preventive control. All right. Moving on. So question number 8. Backup is a preventive control. Okay, so we use backup as our example. Remember we were talking about the system crash at Truman State, which some of you were here for back 2 years ago when we had the ransomware attack. We had the backup. Did that prevent the attack from occurring? No, it didn't. Okay, so it was not a preventive control. What type of control will we assume backup is? We're going to talk a little bit more about this in chapter 14, actually. But just at its very core, what would you say that is? It's corrective. Yeah, a problem happens, we detect the problem, and then we fix the problem with the backup files we have. So it's a corrective control. Good. All right. Question number 12. Based on COSO 2013, which of the following statements is not correct? Well, let's go through each of the statements. Employees at any level of organization can play a role in internal control. What do you guys think about that statement? Does that sound like a valid statement to everybody in this room? Yes, no, maybe, yes, I do like that. We know that, controls can actually hit multiple roles within or levels of the organization. So employees can actually be affected by controls at any point, okay? If you've ever worked a part-time job, I told my auditing class, my first part-time job was McDonald's because I grew up in the McDonald's generation where Happy Meals were the thing, okay? And I enjoyed McDonald's. That's before the value meals even existed, you know, when we bought quarter pounders, it was full price right there. Granted, full price back then was like $1, but yeah, it was big in McDonald's, and so you know, you have work a part-time job like that, you don't even think about the controls in the context, but you are subject to controls. Management can't open a cash register without a proper transaction. That's a form of control. Internal controls provide reasonable assurance only. So, did we see that term reasonable assurance in our definition of control? Yes, we did. Okay, that long definition that's there on the very second slide of the presentation. First slide being the title slide, the second slide talked about reasonable assurance. That's a very important concept to accounting, by the way. It's something that you, those of you who are accounting majors will see again, and in a lot of context moving forward. Internal control is a process consisting of ongoing tasks and activities. It sounds like a expanded definition of internal control, but is it a reasonable definition? Yeah, I like that definition, okay? It is part of the definition for that. The responsibility of monitoring the effectiveness of internal controls belongs to the internal audit group. Oh, we have a problem here. Who's the responsibility for internal controls to fall on? Solely on organizational management, okay? It's not part of the internal audit group can actually have some effect on controls, but it's not their responsibility to monitor. It's the responsibility of management to monitor and update as necessary. Yep. All right. Question number 13, which of the following is not one of the 5 essential components of internal control of COSO 2013 framework? I gotta imagine whoever's writing the questions for this just kind of said, we've got to spew out a whole bunch of multiple choice questions because this is just a repeat of the previous question, just with different terms, okay? So which one of these is not one of those 5 components? Control assessment is not one of those 5 components, okay? Again, control environment, entities risk assessment, control activities, information communication, monitoring. Teach auditing for like 10 years and you get those down automatically. You don't even have to think about it anymore. So yeah, all right. Question number 14. Access controls to ensure only authorized personnel have access to a firm's network is considered to be a what? Okay. So what is another term for access control? We talked about it in the slides. We know access controls relate to IT controls and they have to do with what employees can do, this is a good definition of an access control. What's another terminology for access control? A general control. A general control is another term for an access control. So A is our answer. Okay. The ISO 27000 series are a framework for what? So this goes back to those IT control frameworks that we talked about at the end of the lecture. And I said, you don't need to know much more than what their names are and what their areas of responsibility are. Okay. So think about it. COBIT was information, IT system management and governance. Okay. ITIL was about IT service management. And then ISO 27000, which we're talking about here, talking about creation of an information security management system, ISMS. So we can say if we're probably creating information security management system, that it's about information security management. Does that sound reasonable, everybody? That is our answer. All right. Question number 16. Segregation of duty is a what type of control? So I've talked about segregation of duties multiple times in this course. What are the 3 words again for segregation of duties? I remember it's a picture of a car, Dr. Barnes. Yes, it is. It is a picture of a car. CAR. Custody of assets, authorization of transactions, recording of transactions, okay? There were actually multiple questions on it on the first exam, if I remember correctly, that you had to be able to know about. It's not going away. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. But what is the whole goal of that? We're separating out responsibilities because we want to stop people from doing things that they shouldn't be doing. What's another word for stop? Prevent. It's a preventive control. Yes, a preventive control. Question number 19. Which of the following is a correct statement about the COBIT 2019 framework? It's a framework for enterprise risk management. Is that what we talked about with respect to COBIT? It is not. It focuses on providing guidance for information security. At a broad level, maybe, but that's not specifically what we talked about. It is designed for information and technology governance and management. That is what we talked about. So C is our answer. But is it a framework for IT audit conducted by public accounting firms? No, it's actually about organizational operations. All right, wrapping up. We'll do this in record time. What can we say? Use a few sentences to describe IT general controls and application controls and give a few examples of these 2 types of controls. Again, when we talk about general controls, we're talking about access controls. Those are synonymous terminology or terms, okay? So general access controls or application controls. What are we talking about when we talk about general controls? It's what employees can do, what access they have within the system, okay? So what is one of the things that you do in this room that restricts your access to this system that you're trying to use here in Truman State? Type it in your user ID, your password, okay? Occasionally, if you try to access Microsoft tools, they say, you've got to sign in again, and it sends you this notification on here. What's this called again? When you get this thing on Duo, what's that called?
Dual.
Yeah, dual or multi-factor authentication, or two-factor authentication, and duo authentication. Yeah. So multi-factor authentication. Those are all example of access controls that restrict the access of individuals to certain parts of the system or to what they have access to. Can we actually say that TrueView itself has a restriction of those types? Does it have access controls there? So has anybody been on TrueView lately? Look at systems like you guys have student access. If I go on TrueView, am I going to have the same level of access as you all? I can access student stuff, but for the most part, the student stuff's not irrelevant because I'm not a student. Not relevant because I'm not a student. I've got faculty access, which is going to be faculty information, as well as employee access, since I'm employee in the university. So it's defined by my parameters, my standing in the organization of what I can access. So those are all examples of access controls, or general/access controls. What about application controls? So application controls is actually what the system does, and it tracks activity within the system, okay? So we talked about that. What's an easy way to think about that? So you log into TrueView, you access your student account, you're saying, all right, how much do I owe the registrar, and what I need to actually make payment, or I need to enroll. And basically every step that you take in TrueView, it's got a backup that's going to say, here's what they did in TrueView system, here's the areas they accessed, here's what they did within that. Is that an important control to have in there? Yes, so say something goes wrong and we need to fix the problem, then it's probably important to know where the problem emanated from the first place. So the application control is going to track that activity, okay? Track that activity. All right. Let's see. Question number 7. Segregation duties is important internal control. What functions must be separated? You're not going to hear me say this many more times, but again, we have our 3 separate functional areas. Custody of assets. That's what happens when I start getting excited. I talk too quickly and I mess up words. Very basic word. Custody of assets. Authorization of transactions, recording of transactions, okay? So if ideal segregation duties is not economically feasible, what are some compensating controls to reduce the risk of fraud or error? This is not something we've talked about directly, but is it possible that you have an organization that is not large enough to separate out all those responsibilities? What do we think? How many people do you think they probably have in the accounting department here at the city of Kirksville? Probably a few people here, maybe like 3 or 4. So they have working in different departmental areas, then they probably do not have enough, like within payroll, to separate out custody, authorization, and recording of transactions. Okay, so if that's the case, custody, authorization, recording can't be separated out. So that may happen in smaller organizations. Does that mean that we have to just scrap the entire organization? Say, yeah, we can't do it. We can't separate out responsibility. So this organization, we got to get rid of it. Okay, is that the way it's going to work? What about for charities? Has anybody ever donated to a charity before? You don't have to raise your hand. I'm not calling you out on this one. Just say, yeah. So if you donate to a charity, do you want that to go to administration or do you want that to go to the cause that you're donating to? Like if you donate to Donors Choose, you want that to go to the classroom, right? Okay. So they want minimum administration. It means they probably don't have the infrastructure to separate out responsibilities. What is the solution to that problem? So if that's the case, we probably want to have something called a compensating control to reduce the risk of fraud or error. That's usually going to be some sort of review over the process. So we don't have the necessary personnel to separate out custody, authorization, recording, but we do have a manager that periodically will review the process and make sure that there's no issues. So there don't appear to be any transactions that look erroneous or movement of assets to places they shouldn't go. So if segregation duties are not possible, compensating controls are basically something that remediates the necessity for segregation of duties. All right, last question. There are 3 types of controls: preventive, detective, corrective. List some examples of each type. Explain why type of controls auditors would focus on when evaluating companies' effective controls and why. All right. So preventive controls. We just talked about one of my favorite preventive controls of all time. What was that called? Had 3 components to it: custody, authorization, recording. What do we call that? Not everybody at once. You're overwhelming me. Segregation of duties. Yes, segregation of duties. Again, stops people from doing things they shouldn't be doing. It's a preventive control. Okay. What about a detective control? Okay, detective control. What's an example of detective control? So the example we talked about in there, our discussion in there is our discussion in the chapter was bank reconciliations. Anybody done a bank reconciliation in one of their classes? I know that a lot of you in Dr. Ison's class did a bank reconciliation. What is the purpose of a reconciliation in the first place? Just actually make sure that your activity matches what you think it should. Like, I think I've got $10,000 in the bank account. I look at the reconciliation, it says I got 4. All right. That's a problem. All right. That's a problem that you need to detect and then subsequently correct the problem. What is an example of corrective control we talked about earlier? We said that when Truman State shut down, and we had backup systems example of corrective controls. Okay. So all of those are very important. So what do you think the auditors are going to focus on? What are the auditors going to focus on if they're talking about the effectiveness of internal controls? Do you think they're going to focus on just one? So their primary focus is probably going to be on preventive controls because stopping a problem is preferable to the problem ever taking place. So the very first point is going to say, let's focus on preventive controls and make sure they're as effective as possible. They're as strong as possible. Are preventive controls infallible? Can we prevent everything bad from occurring? The answer is no, by the way. So that's a lesson you should take with you in life. Can we prevent bad things from happening? The answer is no, okay? We can try to minimize them, but bad things are going to happen, which is why we need good detective and corrective controls. So if something bad happens, we know what the problem is, and then we can actually fix it. Again, to reiterate something that I said on Monday, when we talk about preventive controls, those are usually used by themselves. They're standalone controls. We talk about detective and corrective controls. Those are usually used jointly because we identify a problem. And then once we identify what the problem is and the scope of the severity of the problem, we fix the problem. Okay. Both types of controls or both categories, all 3 of categories of controls are very necessary, but we need to understand what their scope is and what their purpose is and why they're important. All right. We're done for today. See you all on Friday.